I know this happened a long time ago, but I'm just now remembering bits and pieces of that event, and I'm thankful to be safe and sane. Honestly, I'm sharing this to get some input or opinions, because I'm not sure what to make of it. I'll start by saying that this happened a while back, in 2019 when I was 16 years old, so I was very naive and gullible. I understand it might not have been a human trafficking case, but it definitely seemed suspicious. For some context, this took place in a relatively large North American city. It was late December, just a few days before Christmas. I had just finished hanging out with my friends and was taking public transit, the subway, to get home. My friends lived in a different area, so I had to travel back alone. The subway cars were mostly empty and it was already dark out. I recall it being around 8 or 9 p.m. I was sitting on an individual seat where the setup was structured in a way that had another seat perpendicular to mine, which was empty. This guy, who seemed relatively young, plopped down on the empty seat next to me and immediately greeted me with a smile. At the time, I didn't think much of it since, honestly, I thought he was cute. He had chestnut-colored hair parted in the middle, was relatively tall and slim, and had nice facial features. I don't remember his face in detail, but I remember thinking he was really cute. He was wearing a sweater and jeans and didn't seem too casual or out of place. Once he sat down, he smiled, introduced himself, and told me his name. We started making small talk, and he mentioned that he had just finished university. This made me ask how old he was, and he said he was 24, which seemed to match his appearance. What really creeped me out was when I told him I was 16 years old, and he didn't seem at all fazed by it. In fact, he smirked and grinned a little, mentioning how he missed being that young and telling me to stay in school. Then he started asking me about what I was doing alone on the subway, what my plans had been, and what I was doing in the next few hours. I unfortunately answered him by saying I had no plans. He then told me that his friends had dared him to bring a random girl, someone he didn't know, back to their party or hang out. I remember thinking this sounded unbelievable, so I insisted that I wanted to go home, but he kept begging me, saying it would be fun and that if I was uncomfortable, he'd bring me right back to the subway station. I kept insisting that my mom would get mad, and I asked if there was another day we could do this, but he said it was a one-time thing. He kept repeating that it was a rare gathering, that he hadn't seen his friends in a long time, and that he probably wouldn't see them after the event because they all had full schedules. He also kept saying he wouldn't keep me out too late. Eventually, I gave in. I know it was a stupid decision and I can't believe it to this day. We passed through a few subway stations before getting off in an area that was pretty deserted. It was known for its issues with drugs, prostitution, and poverty. At the time, I didn't know that, but looking back, it was pretty obvious. The neighborhood still has a bad reputation. The guy, let's call him Ben, then revealed that his real name was different from what he had told me earlier and was seemingly Slavic. I suspect the name he gave me was probably fake as well. Then he started asking me very intrusive questions like, what are your darkest secrets? What's your home life like? What's stressing you out right now? Why did you decide to come with me? He said he liked getting to know people on a deeper level, which is why he was asking these personal questions. I was a straight A student at the time, so I told him that my main concern was my studies. He said that there must be more than that. At this point, we had been walking for about 15 minutes when a car slowed down next to us. The driver rolled down his window and said, "Hey," but Ben immediately shooed him away. Ben then told me that the man was a John, a term I didn't know at the time. It turns out that a John is someone who hires a person for sex, which made me realize that the situation was even worse than I'd initially thought. I started feeling a bit uneasy but still made it to the hangout a few minutes later. It was in a regular townhouse, nothing worn down or unusual. When I got there, I was greeted by about 5 or 6 guys, all seeming to be over 25. 2 of them looked to be above 30. They all stared at me and immediately asked how old I was. I told them I was 16. One of the guys seemed a bit shocked and said, "Come on, man, that's my sister's age. She might even be in the same high school." They all laughed it off and moved on, never bringing it up again. They barely asked me any other questions except for, "How did you guys meet?" It was also clear that someone's dad owned the place, as there was an older man dozing off on the couch. We gathered around a dinner table and the host served food to me and the other guests. I didn't eat because I was starting to feel queasy about the situation. After everyone, except me, finished eating, we all went upstairs. Ben started playing the guitar and another guy joined in on the piano. They then asked me to film them with Ben's phone, so I did. While they were playing, I started getting a really bad feeling and felt like I needed to leave. I put the phone down and slowly made my way toward the door. One of the older guys was standing near it and asked me what was going on and if I was enjoying their company. We talked for a minute and he claimed to be an accountant. Then he started leaning in and trying to hover over me by the door frame. I quickly stepped back into the staircase and made my way to the front door, opened it and went out to the driveway. Fortunately, the door wasn't locked. Ben followed me and asked if I wanted to leave. I immediately said yes, and this time he didn't insist on bringing me back in. Right before I left, I told Ben that my mom had been relentlessly calling me and was worried. He agreed to let me go. On our way back, he asked me if I was really 16 and not younger. He said that if he were my dad, he would never let me out of his sight again, and that what I had just done, going to the party in the first place, was the dumbest thing he'd ever seen any girl do, especially since I had no reason to do that, according to him. Once he walked me back to the subway station, I asked him for his Snapchat or any type of social media he had. I was such a moron. He told me he didn't use his phone like that and was completely off the grid. I went home and never heard from him again. Although I didn't face conventional harassment like violence or sexual advances, and this happened a while ago, I'm honestly scared I could have been a potential victim of sexual assault or human trafficking. Though the trafficking part might be a stretch, you never know. I'm wondering if there's any way I could leave an anonymous tip to the city or something. I looked through public records but couldn't find anything. This happened a few years ago, and sometimes I still have nightmares about what could have happened if I hadn't managed to get away. I live in a big city with lots of bars and clubs, and I have experience with partying and drugs. I've been in blackout drunk situations before, but this was not that. That night I decided to go out with some friends to go bar hopping. I mainly knew only one of the girls that I hung out with on the regular. The other 2 were more acquaintances or strangers. I was very outgoing and loved meeting people, so that wasn't new for me. We had a few drinks at one bar and then moved on to the next one. We were having a great time, laughing and just enjoying ourselves. At one point, one of the girls I didn't know well pulled out party stuff. I decided to skip it because I wasn't trying to get messed up that night. My friend agreed to join and she and the third girl went to the bathroom. Barb, the second girl, kept asking me to go with them, but I kept saying no. After the third time, she got a little aggressive and mean, but then my friend came back and Barb acted like nothing had happened. Some new guys joined our group and started flirting. I was in a relationship, but Barb and my friend were not. By then, the second girl had left. Barb and my friend were starting to get pretty drunk. I went to use the bathroom and text my boyfriend that I was coming home soon, only to realize my phone was dead. When I came back, the guys had gotten us shots. I was still sober and declined the shot. Barb shoved the shot into my hand, and to avoid a scene, I took it. I started to tell my friend I was heading home, but when I saw their faces, I realized they were out of it. I was starting to feel pretty woozy too, so I grabbed all of our things and started pushing them to go. The guys who bought the shots were protesting, but I wasn't getting resistance from the girls. I hailed a cab since my phone was dead, no Uber, and remember putting the girls in the back while telling the driver that we were dropping my friends off at their place and then going to my house. Then I blacked out. I remember dropping off my friend, then blackout. When I came to, I was in the front seat, alone with the driver, and he was holding my hand. I was disoriented and looked around. I saw my wallet in the center cup holder. The meter was off, and the driver said he was taking me to a romantic place. I told him no. I asked him to take me home because my boyfriend was waiting. He said something like, "Stop talking about him, I told you," which in hindsight suggests I had told him before. He said he just wanted to pretend for a little while, and he held my hand tighter. I didn't want to provoke him, so I left my hand there and started reaching for my wallet with the other hand. He saw what I was doing, let go of my hand, and moved my wallet to the other side where I couldn't reach it. Then I blacked out again. When I came to again, we were parked near a very popular, romantic, touristy location in my city. Normally it's packed, but not that night. It's far from everything else, surrounded by woods. I started crying and begged him to take me home. I wanted to see my boyfriend. I promised I wouldn't tell anyone. Please just take me home. He looked at me and said he would take me home if I pretended to be his girlfriend for a little while. I sat there in shock. I wished my brain wasn't so addled. I wished I had never gone out. I wished I could see my boyfriend again. I said okay. He smiled, put my wallet back in the cup holder, and I slowly took it and put it under my leg. He took my hand and looked out the front window at the little lake we were near. He started talking, but I don't remember what he was saying. I was trying not to black out again. I waited until he looked at me and I asked again, "Please take me home." He said he would if I let him give me a kiss. I said no. He looked mad for a second, but then he squeezed my hand tighter and leaned in quickly, kissing me anyway. I kept my lips sealed tight, ready to fight if I had to, ready to bite and scratch and not go down easy. He let go of my hand and backed away. He started the car and we began heading back to civilization. I was crying silently, trying to be quiet so he wouldn't want to touch me or hold my hand again. I waited until we were near enough to other people that I could bolt out of the car and find another way home. I think he saw me reaching for my wallet under my leg and knew what I was planning. He snatched my wallet again and said he would drive me. I nodded, but by then I didn't care about the wallet, my phone, or anything else. I just wanted to get home no matter what. I didn't know what time it was anymore. The streets were nearly empty, no cars, no buses, no people. I didn't care. He stopped at a red light. I unlocked the door, yanked it open, and ran. I didn't look back, but I heard a car peel out of the intersection. He was chasing me. My phone was still dead. I had no wallet, no money. I was really far from home. I was still dizzy and crying. I had no idea what time it was, but I started walking home. I heard a car pull up near me and I started running out of instinct. I heard a woman's voice yell, "Are you okay?" I stopped and spun around. and the most beautiful person I've ever seen in my life was walking towards me slowly, hands out in front of her so she wouldn't scare me. I started crying even harder, more incoherent than I ever had before. She hugged me tightly and asked for my boyfriend's number. She called him and he answered right away. She told him where I was, that I was okay and that she was taking me home. I cried the whole way back, trying to explain what happened, but still woozy and freaking out. It was hard. We drove in mostly silence. When we got home, my boyfriend was outside, losing his mind. My savior gave me her phone number in case I wanted to call her when I felt better, and then she drove off. It ended up being 5 a.m. I left the bar at 10 p.m. That's all I can remember. A week later, my wallet showed up in my mailbox. Taxi driver, I hope we never meet again. I was around 16 at the time of this happening. Firstly, I'd like to explain what kind of person I am, so my actions make more sense. I'm an average-looking girl, a bit overweight, which in my country makes me really undesirable. For this reason, I wasn't used to males hitting on me, and I didn't even consider it a possibility back then. I was usually the man in our group, the girl who looks after everyone when they're drinking, and if a guy's being rude or harassing someone, I'm the one to shut him down. I don't know why I took on this role. Maybe it's because my friends are too naive and nice. I'm like that to strangers when I'm alone too. I always try to help people if they look confused or ask me for directions or anything else. On this particular night, I was heading home from school. My high school is in the city center, and I take the bus home. Since the buses get overcrowded during peak hours and I really hate being around crowds of people, I usually wait around 30 minutes to an hour to catch a bus. This night, I walked to another bus stop, about 5 stops before the one closest to my school, so I could kill time and take an empty bus. It was dark and I was the only one at the stop. I usually don't have a problem going out alone late at night, as I don't have the men bad, men assault mentality drilled into me. So I'm just minding my own business when this 45 to 50-year-old man comes up to me. He has a very friendly face and a smile, so I didn't think anything of it. He asks me something and I realize he's Turkish. I tell him I don't understand, so he uses basic Bulgarian words he knows, and I somehow understand that he's just asking for directions. Of course, I try my best to explain, and after I feel like he understood, I expect him to just stop talking to me. Nope. He sits disturbingly close to me and starts talking to me again, this time in Turkish. I try to be polite and politely ignore him while nodding my head with a smile, looking at the timetable. For some reason, this guy starts asking for my phone number. At this point, I realize this isn't just a lost foreigner. I try to shut him down by saying I don't have a phone. I don't know why I thought that would work, but I finally give in and tell him a random phone number. He says something else to me, again in Turkish, and then the worst thing happens. All this time, I'm looking at the bus's arrival time, praying that he won't try to call the number, but of course he does. And he shows me the phone and asks why it's not ringing. My stomach just flips. I quickly try to think of something and remember that I have my old Motorola in my bag. I usually brought it to school to give to teachers who collected phones during class. I also liked playing games on it. It was 2014 after all. Fortunately, the battery was dead, so I just pretend that's the reason the call isn't going through. I see this guy try to argue, but at that moment the bus comes and I get on. I sit in the seat behind the driver as usual. After about 10 minutes, I get this weird feeling. I can't explain it, but I feel like I'm being watched. So I look around, but since I'm in the front seat, I can't see everything. Fortunately, our buses have this gigantic mirror on the inside which shows the whole bus. I look into it and clearly see him sitting in the back seat, his legs clearly visible. I start to panic. I'm still not sure he's following me, but I'm a very cautious person, so I can't ignore it. I start checking for him at every stop and he's still there. I get even more paranoid, so I decide to get off the bus at the next stop. The stop is near our local mall, which luckily works until 10 p.m. I decide to go in, and if he follows me, I'll try to sneak out. And of course, he follows. You have to understand that in my town, almost nobody goes out after 9 p.m., so the mall is almost empty. I look around, trying to figure out how to disappear from him, but there's no way. The mall is an open space. There are 3 floors, all almost empty, so I'd be easily spotted anywhere. Now you might say you should have asked security for help. But no, in Bulgaria we don't do that. It literally never even crossed my mind. The security here is just some old man who walks around all day. They don't actually do anything. If it were today, I might not be as stupid. But back then, that wasn't even an option. And besides, there wasn't even any security around. So, I did the most logical thing I could think of. I decided to use the knowledge I'd acquired from the previous week. The mall had a cool corridor system behind the stores. It was completely unmarked by any signs, and if you didn't know where you were going, you'd probably get lost because it's just endless white corridors that lead to empty rooms for storage or other stuff. Well, me being an avid anime fan loved wandering around these corridors, pretending I was a ninja from Naruto on a mission. 16-year-olds, am I right? So I can proudly say I learned the right path to the back stairway of the mall. Because I was smart and obsessed with being a spy, I decided to lure this creepy guy into the corridors and then slip out the back of the mall. I entered H&M and pretended to look around just to see if he was still stalking me. He didn't even try to hide. He stood outside the store just staring in. I got really scared for a second, but then I remembered I'm like the best 007 agent out there, so I just kept walking around the mall. Eventually, I entered the corridors, and at that point I booked it to the staircase. I ran out and didn't stop until I'd gone 2 bus stops. I looked back, but there was no one, so I proudly declared myself a hero and went home. Today, at 21, I look back and just think about how stupid that was. I'd probably be 10 times as scared today as I was back then. But well, I hope I never find myself in that situation again. I've had a lot of creepy things happen to me, so I might write the rest down someday. During my junior year of high school, my parents got a job offer out of state, so I was forced to move across the country. I started at a new school late in the academic year in mid-March, and had a hard time fitting in. All I wanted was to make a friend, but I was too shy to talk to anyone. Around this time, my friends left MySpace to join Facebook, so I did the same to stay connected with them. A few days later, I received a friend request from David. David was a guy I'd been friends with in my old town. Well, he wasn't exactly my friend, but rather the friend of another friend. My friend Jerry had introduced him to the group and would bring him along every time we hung out. We knew that David was a year older than us and that he went to a different school. But other than that, we didn't really know anything about him. In fact, we mostly just referred to him as Jerry's friend because he never really talked to any of us. So when I got the friend request from him on Facebook, I was confused. He had hardly spoken to me when I lived near him. So for him to want to be friends with me after all this time seemed a little strange. But I was so lonely and desperate for friends that I didn't care. Other than that, nothing seemed off about him. At least, not at the time. Looking back, I do remember that he didn't have many pictures or friends when I first accepted his request. But like I said, this was when people were just starting to use Facebook, so it didn't seem that weird for him to have such a sparse profile. Over the years, his friend list grew much bigger, even bigger than mine, so I didn't think much of it. Anyway, I accepted his friend request, and just like that, David and I became friends. He told me that he had just started university and was lonely because he was too shy to make friends. I told him I was having a hard time at my new school for the same reasons, and we bonded over that. Little by little, we started talking more. He shared his problems with me, and I shared mine with him. When it was time for me to apply to university, he even helped me out. He taught me how to sign up for my SATs, helped me apply for scholarships, and even paid for one of my application fees, using a Visa gift card, so I didn't receive any of his personal information and he didn't receive any of mine. When I finally started university, he helped with that too. He told me where to buy books, gave me studying tips, and provided emotional support. So when he asked for my phone number, I didn't hesitate to give it to him. David was my best friend, and I wanted to keep him close, even though we were physically far apart. It was around this time that David started sharing more of his life with me. And all of it was pretty normal stuff. He had a job at Pizza Hut, which he hated but needed to keep in order to pay bills. He also played soccer, but not for his university or anything. It was just a group of guys who got together on the weekends to unwind. The biggest thing he told me was that he had flunked out of university and that I was the only one who knew because he was too embarrassed to tell anyone else. At one point, he also had to move back in with his mom, which he really hated. 2 or maybe 3 years into our friendship, my family decided to take a trip back to the city where we had lived before moving across the country. And I excitedly told him and all my old high school friends. Most of them were pretty excited about the idea of us all hanging out together again, because after high school we had all just gone our separate ways. But when I contacted David about it, he showed a little interest in hanging out with us. I thought this was weird. I wasn't some stranger he met online, but someone who had been in his life for many years. I kept asking him why, and finally he gave me an answer. He told me that his pictures had been heavily edited and that he was afraid of disappointing me if we met in real life. I told him that it didn't matter what he looked like and that I just wanted to meet him. But he still didn't want to hang out. Instead, he started being a huge jerk to me. He knew exactly what buttons to push, knew all of my insecurities and secrets, and started using all of that knowledge to hurt me. So I just stopped talking to him. Some weeks later, I met my friends as planned. And much to my surprise, I saw David there looking just like he did in his pictures. I didn't understand why he had lied about editing his photos or why he said he didn't want to meet me only to show up at our friend's house. But I was so angry at him that I didn't ask any questions. I just kept waiting for an apology, but David wouldn't approach me. He was treating me just like he had back in high school. I was really upset, but given that he had been so cruel to me, I figured this was just another attempt to get under my skin. We were all drinking and talking about what we had been up to. When it was his turn to share, he pretty much just said the same things I already knew about him. He said he wished he was still in university like the rest of us, but that he had flunked out and was just living with his mom. He said he was miserable there and wanted to move out, but his job at Pizza Hut wasn't paying him enough to move out on his own. At this point, I was already pretty pissed off. The alcohol had given me enough courage to finally ask him why he had been ignoring me. He apologized but admitted that he hardly remembered me, which hurt my feelings but also made me even angrier. I told him about Facebook and about our text messages, and he just kept insisting that he didn't use Facebook. Apparently, he had used MySpace at one point, but had stopped using it when he switched over to Tumblr. A Facebook account was something he hadn't even considered making. I asked him about the text messages, and he just said that I had probably confused him with another David because he had never had my number. I thought that denying it was a lousy excuse, but Jerry backed him up, which pissed me off even more. The thing was, David hadn't just been talking to me on Facebook, but to a bunch of us. So when we kept calling him out on his story, he told us to text this David guy to prove that it wasn't him. He set his phone on the table and I texted him, but no new messages appeared on his phone. Then, while we were all arguing about giving it some time, the David I had been talking to for years responded, proving that we had been talking to a fake all along. Things got pretty awkward at this point, with all of us feeling angry and betrayed, and David obviously feeling extremely violated. So with all of us wanting answers, we opened up our friend's laptop and searched for David's profile on Facebook. The first thing David pointed out was that whoever this was, they were using his mother's maiden name and not his real last name. And while most of the people on his friend list were people he knew in real life, none of them were people he had kept in contact with. His display picture was also of a dog he had owned years ago, but that dog had since died, just like the fake David had told me. These seemed to be measures used by this person to keep David's close friends from actually finding him on Facebook. The older pictures on Facebook had been taken from his MySpace back when he still used it, but most of the newer ones were taken from his Tumblr, which he apparently uploaded to pretty often. The weirdest thing, though, was that there were some pictures he swore he had never seen before. These were all pictures of his soccer games taken from the audience, which the fake David had said his brother had taken. But the real David said his brother never went to his games and neither did any of his family or friends. Further exploring his fake profile, David pointed out that while a bunch of status updates were about things that had never happened, a lot of them were accurate. Whoever this person was, they had been watching David for a long time. They knew his schedule, knew what movies he went to, knew what ice cream flavors he liked, knew his favorite bands, knew practically everything about him. We did confront the fake David, but he never answered the text messages and instead deleted the profile before we had the chance to examine it any further. So we never did get any answers. I don't know why that person pretended to be David for so long, or why they even did it in the first place. All I know is that I felt extremely violated for having shared so many private details of my life with him. And of course, I also felt a great deal of pity for the real David. I wondered for the longest time how this person found him and how they managed to learn so many private details of his life. Then, a few months back, my mother called me saying she found a profile with her name but my pictures on it. My middle name is my mom's first name, something very few people know. She thought I had made a second profile, and I didn't tell her the truth because I didn't want to scare her. The truth was that I didn't even know that profile existed. I have always kept Facebook set to private, and I no longer accept random friend requests, nor do I post my pictures anywhere else. So this profile only had really old pictures of me, and nothing weird like David's soccer game pictures. But it was still active, and had been active for a while. None of the friends were people I knew, and none of the updates were about things I had been doing in real life. I don't know if the profile belonged to the same person who stalked David, But I'm extremely average looking, so I don't know why anyone would want to use my pictures when there are way prettier girls online. So I'm guessing it had to be him. I don't know, I just reported the profile and it no longer exists. But I wonder if this person is still pretending to be me or if they've moved on to somebody else. So we all know how this goes. Long-time reader, first-time poster. Now, to people like me who are obsessed with these true scary stories, this might not sound too bad, but trust me, once you're in these situations, it's a whole new kind of scary. I want to start by saying that I am a 21-year-old female, and I come from the very beautiful but very sketchy place called South Africa. I live with my boyfriend and our 2 dogs. Our neighborhood is pretty safe for the most part, and we haven't had any problems so far, so we thought nothing of it when my boyfriend left to go visit his mom for a few days, and I was left alone with the dogs. Yesterday was a nightmare from the moment my eyes opened until I went to bed that night. The night before, I went to bed and took my usual chronic medication and painkillers because of a terrible headache. And that night, I also took melatonin because I have trouble sleeping. About 10 minutes later, I started feeling really ill. I talked to my aunt who's a nurse, and it turns out that mixing antidepressants, painkillers, and melatonin is a very bad combination that can make you very ill, and in severe cases be deadly. Luckily for me, I didn't take a high dosage of pain meds and melatonin, so it didn't do much except make me feel a little ill. I started feeling very lightheaded and headed to bed. I passed out, and I mean blacked out completely. I woke up the next morning to the sound of a gate opening. I thought to myself that it was probably just my parents or brother, because they all have keys and wanted to check in or maybe forgot to take something. A few minutes went by and I didn't hear anything, so I assumed it was our neighbor's gate, which sounds exactly like ours. Or maybe I just imagined it because I was still out of it from the night before. A while later, I heard footsteps walking on the dead leaves on the grass outside, and my dog started freaking out. I thought it might be the stray cat from the neighborhood, or maybe a monkey or big bird. I slowly opened the door, not wanting to scare whatever it was away, but to show the dogs that everything was fine. As I stepped out of the room, I started hearing someone trying to open the back patio door, and I could clearly hear a male voice talking. My blood ran cold. I ran to the kitchen to grab a knife and slowly headed back outside. I look around the corner and see a man standing in our backyard by the door. I died internally. I was not about to confront this man by myself. I rushed back inside, locked myself in the room, and called my mom and dad, who at this time were at work, 2 hours away from me. They freaked out and called my brother, who lives a few minutes away from us but who was on his way to my parents. He turned his car around and floored it back to our place. He got here and stormed into the yard. Turns out it was a new gardener my mom had hired. He got the times wrong for when he was supposed to come work, so no one knew he was coming. Our gate was also malfunctioning and opened by itself, so when he got here and saw the open gate, he assumed it was left open for him to come in and work. He was by the back door trying to get my attention so I could give him the keys to open the shed for the tools and trash bags. If you think this is the end of the story, you would be quite mistaken. That whole ordeal left me severely freaked out the rest of the day. I spent some time in my room hanging out with my dogs while the gardener worked outside. I realized by this point that it was my boyfriend and I's anniversary, and sadly I would be spending it alone. I sent him a cute message and we talked for a bit. I decided I wanted to treat myself to some sushi and a milkshake, so I used a food delivery service to order the food. For privacy reasons, I won't be saying which one it is, I had to order the milkshake and sushi from 2 different places because the milkshake place didn't do sushi and the sushi place didn't do milkshakes. I ordered the milkshake first, and a few minutes later, it arrived. I went back inside with it and then ordered the sushi, waiting for it to arrive. A few minutes later, the app let me know that the driver was here, so I headed outside to grab the food. How this company works is they stop on the other side of the road from your house, check your phone order, mark it off, hand you the food, and drive off. But this driver stopped on the side of the road where our house is. He asked me to confirm my name and number. This had never happened before, but I was too hungry and tired to care, so I didn't think much of it. I walked up to the window to grab the food, and he said no, that he wanted to drive up to the driveway of the house. First, red flag. At this point, I was a little uncomfortable, but I didn't think too much of it. It could just be my mind working overtime after this morning's events and the fact that I was alone. I again went to grab the food, and the driver said no, he'd get out and give it to me himself. That's when the red flags really started to scream. He began making very sexual comments about how I looked and so on. I took a few steps back and told him to just give me the food. I had something else to do. He walked a few steps into the yard and my dogs came running out. He asked if my dogs were aggressive and if they bite. I've been listening to Let's Not Meet and True Crime stories since I was 12, so I knew I had to say they were very aggressive and would bite. He took a few steps back out of the yard and back to his car. I thought to myself, okay, he listened and he's scared. I'm in the clear. Yeah, no. He then grabbed a bottle from his seat and asked if I could go fill it up with water for him. I took it and headed inside the house. I know, stupid move on my end. Looking back, it was probably the mistake that led up to everything that happened next. I filled it up and went back outside to give it to him, and then, this is when it got really creepy. He was walking around my yard, checking to see if I was alone or not. I knew this because he made more creepy comments, and one specifically about the fact that I was alone. I tried to make up a story about how I wasn't alone and that my dad and boyfriend were on their way. But he started talking to our gardener who was working outside. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, and afterward he just gave me this creepy-ass smile. That's when I realized, oh, he knows I'm alone for the next few days. At this point, I was trying very, very hard to get out of the situation. He started making more weird, creepy, and sexual remarks, and then I kid you not. He said, "This is a really nice house. Must be full of expensive stuff that's easily takeable if they left such a little beautiful thing alone to take care of it." My jaw dropped. I was ready to start calling my dad. And no, it never crossed my mind to call the police because, in my experience, they're useless and rude. So that wasn't even an option in my mind. He made a few more remarks and then got in his car and left. I was really freaking out at this point. So I let my parents know, locked myself in the house, and turned on the alarm. I kept checking the gate every now and then to make sure no one was there, but the same sketchy car kept driving past the house very slowly. To distract myself, I called one of my friends and played an online game with them. Then I got a Snapchat, Facebook, and TikTok notification about a new follower. It was all from the same account. I didn't think much of it, since this happens a lot and my social media accounts are all connected. So if you find one, you can find the others. But when I checked the notification, my heart stopped for a second. It was the same damn creepy driver from the afternoon. Yes, I reported him to the app and they said they'd look into it. At this point, I was extremely uncomfortable and told my parents about it. They were really freaked out and didn't want me to be alone. So my boyfriend came home and my brother's girlfriend said she'd come stay for a few days. We called the security company, told them everything, and a guard came over to take my statement. He said creepy stuff and break-ins had been happening a lot lately, so they would keep a patrol car in the area for safety. I was told to keep the remote with the panic button with me at all times. So the three of us were chilling and I ordered pizza for dinner. And we got the pizza and went inside. Suddenly, the outside alarm started blaring and we saw flashlights outside. We grabbed weapons and hid inside and I pressed the panic button. 6 minutes later, a patrol car arrived. They checked the yard and said the fence in the backyard had been tampered with, and it looked like someone had tried to cut through it. But luckily, no one was in or around the yard that they could see. We locked ourselves in the room, locked every door and window, and turned the alarm on again. We barely slept all night and jumped at every little sound, but nothing else happened. I've always read these types of stories and thought they weren't that bad and they don't happen a lot. Then it happened to me and now I can tell you, it's the scariest thing ever. Being in that situation is a lot worse than just hearing about it or reading it. So to the very creepy delivery driver who made me feel very uncomfortable, stalked me and then tried to break into my house, let's not meet again. Update. So I just realized something and I'm severely freaked out. I think the creepy delivery guy might be a full-on stalker. I made 3 orders that day. 1 from a grocery store and the other 2 from the previously mentioned delivery app. When I placed the orders that day, my location was malfunctioning, and I didn't even notice. So the first delivery guy calls and says he's at the gate, but when I go outside, he's not there. I redirected him to my actual location. The same thing happened with the delivery guy who brought the milkshake. I thought it was weird but didn't connect the dots. But then the creepy delivery guy showed up at my exact location. I didn't see anything wrong yet and thought my location fixed itself. So I checked my emails to see if I had received any updates about the report I made on the guy. When I checked the email about yesterday's deliveries, my blood turned ice cold. The sushi delivery was marked with the wrong address, 3 neighborhoods away from my actual location. And this guy knew my real location, my name and my number off by heart. But that's not information that's shared with them. Is that weird or am I being paranoid? This happened back in 2003 when I was 10 years old, and my half-sister was about 16. If it matters to anyone, I am female. I got off the school bus and came home to discover that my doorknob had been completely removed. I rang the doorbell for my sister to come open the door. It took a moment, but she finally opened it, pulled me inside quickly, and then locked the door. I asked her what had happened to the knob, and she said she came home to find it off, with a toothpick in it. She didn't know how to put it back on, so she was waiting for our dad to get home. No one called the police as far as I remember. My parents weren't very worrisome folks, which bothers me to this day. A few weeks later, my family and I were watching a movie in the living room when a loud bang came from our kitchen window. It sounded like someone had slammed their fist against it. My sister and I got scared. My parents were unfazed as usual, but my dad went outside to look around. I begged him not to because, being young and a daddy's girl, I thought he might die. I stood in the doorway and watched him the whole time. He found no one and brushed it off as one of our neighbor's kids, but I was friends with most of them, and they promised me it wasn't them. I could only take their word for it. For a while, I noticed my sister acting strange, like she was paranoid. She would jump at small noises and look around the house a lot. Even though I noticed this behavior, I didn't really care much because nothing was bothering me personally. I was such a nice little sister. My neighbor friends and I liked to play hide and seek at night around my house. We had a mini forest behind my home that led to a park. I always walked through it as a shortcut and was so familiar with it that it didn't bother me to hide there in the dark. One night, as I was hiding behind bushes, I heard movement in the woods, followed by what sounded like footsteps and crackling sticks. I thought maybe it was a fellow hider, but then I remembered that I was the only one hiding there. I got a little scared, so I decided to head back to the front of the house to hide under a car. At the time, I didn't think the movement was from a human. I thought it belonged to a bear, even though bears didn't live anywhere near our town. I imagined all kinds of things when I was scared. My sister insisted that I shouldn't play outside after dark. She never used to care about me playing at night. I rebelled against her wishes and would sneak out to play with my friends or go to their houses. I finally listened to her when she taught me a lesson by locking me out of the house. I sat outside by the door crying for about 15 minutes until she let me in. For a while, I noticed she was always getting cell phone calls, but she never picked them up. I asked her why, and she said people kept prank calling her. I believed her, but prank callers wouldn't be that persistent for weeks and weeks. They'd probably give up. We would get a lot of calls on our house phone too. When I answered, either the other line would be silent, or a man would ask if I could put my sister on the phone. She always hung up, and I thought she was rude for doing that constantly. Weeks later, I was at the park with my friends when a guy who looked about in his 20s came up to our group and started chatting. He seemed really nice and gave us bubble gum. I thought he was a bit cute and wanted him to play with us. I did and still do have a thing for older men. He did, and we showed him how to play our made-up games. He introduced himself as Ben. We had a blast. No one thought anything was weird about an older guy hanging out with a couple of little kids. When it was time to go home, two of my friends, brothers, had to eat dinner, and my best friend had to check in with her parents every hour. I was going to walk home with them, but Ben stopped me and said he wanted to show me something. I left my friends and stayed with Ben. Foolish child, I know, but I honestly didn't find him dangerous. That's how predators get young ones, sadly. So I stupidly went with him to his car. We drove around for a bit, went to a 7-Eleven to buy us Slurpees, and then drove some more. I noticed he was texting a lot. Yes, there was texting in 2003. As it got dark, I told him that I should probably go home. He told me he hadn't shown me what he intended to yet. We drove for a while and I started to get worried because I had no idea where we were. We finally reached his apartment and went inside. He showed me his new kittens. I was so attached to their cuteness that I decided to stay and play with them. He was texting the whole time I was there. After a while, I really wanted to go home because it was getting late and I didn't want my parents to get angry with me. I got spankings a lot, so I was mostly worried about those. He told me he wanted to go to his friend's house first, but I told him that I really had to go home. He started raising his voice and demanded that we stop by his friend's house. I began crying and yelling that I wanted to go home. He looked nervous once that started, so he finally gave in. He gave me orange juice and we left. I don't exactly know why he gave me orange juice, but I'm guessing it was to calm me down. I definitely hope there wasn't something in it. I only took a sip because I wasn't a big fan of the pulp. He wasn't persistent about me drinking it either, so it makes me think it was to relax me. While in the car, I kept making sure he was taking me home by constantly saying, "I want to go home." He called me names like crybaby and annoying. He tried guilt-tripping me by saying he bought me a Slurpee and let me play with his kittens, but in return I wouldn't let him see his friend. I felt a little bad, but I still had my mind set on going home. He dropped me off at a local grocery store. As soon as I got out of the car, he quickly drove off. I was confused about what had just happened and I immediately ran home. There was a police car in our driveway. I went inside the house to find my parents rushing toward me once I entered the door. They actually looked worried for once. My sister was crying and apologizing to me. The police asked me questions. I told them everything. They asked if I knew where he lived exactly, but I wasn't much help. I was confused about why everyone was so eager to find Ben. The police continued to search and patrol the area for a week. I never knew if they found Ben. I later found out that Ben had been stalking and harassing my sister. They met at a party and he became attached to her after that. They exchanged numbers as well as house phones. Well, ours anyways, and they began talking a lot. She wasn't interested in him because he was way older than she was, but she did like him as a friend. He wanted to be more than just friends and made that clear by constantly touching her arms, thighs, and back until she finally felt super uncomfortable and broke off their friendship. He didn't like that idea. She would ignore his calls and texts. He began showing up at her school at the end of the day and demanded that she get into his car. Her friends had her back and never let her go with him. I found out that he had been lurking around our house at night. Guess what? He was the one who tried breaking in by taking off the doorknob. He was the one who hit our window. He was probably the noise I heard in the forest. He would threaten to hurt her and my family if she kept refusing to see him. She threatened him with the police, but he called her bluff. She was actually too afraid to do anything. She didn't want my parents to know she was hanging out with an older guy. My parents may seem careless when it comes to potential life-threatening situations, but they were strict about us hanging out with boys. That was a no-no. My sister thought he would eventually stop, but she was wrong. Apparently, she was the one he was texting the whole time I was with him. He was telling her that he had kidnapped me and was going to hurt and kill me if she didn't date him. She said she would as long as he didn't hurt me. She didn't believe that I was with him at first, but she called my friends' homes and they all confirmed I wasn't there and was last seen with Ben. She had to do something. She finally called my parents, told them the situation, and they called the police. I'm still shocked to this day that my sister didn't say a word about him, especially since he was coming to our house and stalking her. She's a smart person, but I wonder where all her sense went. She was in huge trouble, of course. Our dad grounded her for a month and took away her phone. She had overused the text message limit and it was all because of Ben. By the way, he completely lied about his name to both of us, which makes him even more sketchy. If he couldn't even give his real name to my sister, then he was probably up to no good. People at the party say they barely knew him, but my sister told me she thinks some were his friends and didn't want to rat him out. Thank you for taking the time to read this crazy experience. It was by far the most intense and interesting thing that happened to me in my life. Ben, or whatever your name is, let's not meet. Update. I know that many of you think my parents are horrible and uncaring, but they really are nice and somewhat caring folks. They had the mentality that since our neighborhood was safe, nothing bad could ever happen to us. My sister was very studious and made my parents proud, so they never thought she would go to parties and talk to older men. She didn't do that often. It was occasional. But if you get caught once, parents tend to think that's what their children do all the time. They were upset that she was harassed. She got grounded for putting herself in danger, not to mention putting us in danger, by not speaking up and for underage partying with older men. Did she deserve a full month of house arrest? No, that was harsh, but parents are going to be parents. She learned her lesson though. We both turned out pretty good compared to a lot of the people we went to school with. I just wanted everyone to know that my parents weren't all that bad. I just never mentioned the positive things about them in this story. Also, a commenter suggested that Ben might not have been a predator. I agree. I mean, do I think he was a good person? No. I think he was odd, that's for sure, and very dominant and demanding. Ben didn't pressure me heavily and he gave up rather quickly, which makes me think he was all talk and just trying to scare my sister into dating him. That doesn't excuse his behavior though, and I'm not entirely ruling out that he could have been a predator. For those who think I'm being a bit hypocritical for saying my sister had no sense, but in fact, I went with Ben, a stranger. I just want to say that I was a kid. Kids have no sense. Well, most don't. They can be fooled easily. I lived in a town where there was no violence and everyone seemed good. Plenty of strangers talked to kids and nothing ever happened. What I did was stupid, yes, but I think my sister, who was 16, should have more sense than a 10-year-old. I know I'm being harsh on her, but I just can't imagine myself not resolving the issue. I am a confident person and won't take crap from anyone, so that's probably why I can't relate to her. But I guess I'll blame fear and my sister less. Fear sucks, but like I said, I like to handle my situations. And it's bewildering to me why people won't do anything when things get way out of hand. Now, what I'm about to say might offend some people. I don't think it's anyone's fault when they become a victim. But if they don't take initiative and continue to let themselves be victims, then it becomes a big issue. Don't wait for things to settle down when they're actually getting worse. My sister regretted not speaking up, and she learned her lesson. Yes, fear plays a huge role in staying silent. But don't you all agree that the smart and best thing to do is speak up? I sound harsh, but I think it's the truth. Anyways, to end on a happier note, I love my sister dearly. Don't let my tough opinions tell you otherwise. We lived happily ever after.